Kingsley. I'm a fashion researcher, writer, and ethical stylist, and I'm also the co-founder of the DC Sustainable Fashion Collective. It's a pleasure to have you all here. Thank you all. Thank you to our panelists, the people that traveled from New York, Providence, Boston, everywhere. So we're very, very happy to be able to host the first Sustainable Fashion Conference in DC. I would like to invite our panelists, our speakers from panel 2 to please have a seat at the table. And it's my pleasure to reintroduce my friend, my associate and partner, Janice Wallace, the editor-in-chief of Fashion Magazine and the co-founder of the collective as a moderator. The panel is called The Consumer Trap. Thank you, Joelle. So we might as well go around so everybody can introduce themselves.
I'm Diana Watts. I'm on.
Hello.
Oh, okay, sorry. Diana Watts. I'm on faculty at Trinity Washington University, a women's college here in DC, and Tompkins Environmental Science Program. I work with undergraduate business students and master's level environmental scientists, and I'll tell you why I think that's of interest later on. I can't wait to hear that. My name is Amy Dufault. I'm the communications director at the Brooklyn Fashion and Design Accelerator. And I am a sustainable fashion journalist and have been for the past 10 years, and a journalist for 20. And I work with Fibershed and Fashion Revolution, natural dyes, many things.
Hi, I'm Miriam Kingsley, owner and co-founder of Lady Farmer. We are a sustainable apparel and lifestyle brand here in Maryland, and it's really great to be here. Thanks.
I'm Emma Kingsley, the other half of Lady Farmer. It's my mom. Yes, so we are a brand based in DC or just outside DC, and we design everything here. We source about our sourcing, and all of our clothes are sewn here in DC by another mother-daughter team.
My name is Marissa Adler, and I'm a consultant in the waste and recycling industry. I work for a company called Resource Recycling Systems, and we've had a focus on textile waste for the last few years.
My name is Kaveri Marate. I'm the founder of a startup called Textiles. We do clothing recycling, and I'm also a co-founder of the DC Sustainable Fashion Collective.
Thank you all. This panel was really important to me because I am a reformed shopaholic. I really am. If you guys knew how bad it was, you would be so proud of me. I was really, really bad. And then thanks to Fashion Revolution, I changed my horrible ways. And this is vintage, this is secondhand. I've had these shoes for 15 years. And this is a local DC brand. So I take that very seriously. So let's get started and talk. We're going to talk quite a bit about this ideal of overconsumption and what I call the consumer trap. So most people like to shop, but what do you think are the major contributors leading to overconsumption, which is buying things we absolutely don't need? And how has this attitude about shopping changed over the years?
What's that dealing with? Let's switch things up. Let's not get in the trap of pills.
I'd say one of the issues with overconsumption is actually overproduction. I think now that you have these brands that are producing up to 52 cycles of clothing per year, customers are like butterflies. They're excited by, they see something new, they want it. And so part of the issue is going to start with production. What was your other question?
How's the attitude changed about shopping over the years?
Yeah. I think if you look 20 years back and further, people really valued clothing. It was more expensive. It was made much better. I'm actually wearing a vintage house coat. This is a dress. I turned it into a dress, but this was made for wearing around the house. It's from the 1940s, and it's in great shape today, and I don't think you'd see that if you bought a dress at H&M and tried to wear it 60, 70 years later. I don't know that it would be in great shape. So I think, yeah, I lost my train of thought. I was on a roll. Okay, I'm gonna pass it up.
I really believe that our shopaholic tendencies are indicative of greater societal paradigm in which people are, and it's partly psychological too, in which I think this is my personal opinion, is that when you take people further and further away from their connection with the land and the earth and nature, there's some kind of psychological void, and I think that shopping somehow is an attempt to fill that void. I've actually never really read any stats on it or any research, but it's sort of my personal opinion. That's one contributor. And another is just our really busy, hectic lifestyle, in the US anyway. And people don't really have time to think really deeply about their purchases. It's kind of, they go, they make a quick purchase, it doesn't matter because it did cost them a lot anyway, and they're probably not going to keep it for that long, so it's not a huge investment. So I think those are a couple of things that are contributing.
I really like what you just said. Similar to my own thinking about there being a void due to separation and us needing to fill that void. I will also say, and something that our brand talks about a lot, is how much we have shifted in the past generation from being producers to consumers. So whereas in my parents' and their parents' generation, and definitely before that, you were responsible in creating much of your daily needs, or at least attaining them through your own community, and it was very localized. Where, and we listen to a lot of business podcasts, of course, and there's a thing in business where there's a pain point, then there is a solution, and that's a money-making opportunity. So for every single pain point that anyone's ever felt, there's something that you can buy to fix that, which in a way it's great for a lot of things, but it also takes away our agency to sort of soothe ourselves, and it goes so far beyond just eating and clothing ourselves. But because those are the very basic things, that's kind of this track that we're in. So just expanding on that point a bit. And then also, how has it changed over the years? My mom can probably speak more to this, but I know that when I was little, when I was a baby, we went to the mall to hang out because there was like a carousel and you could just be there, and it was definitely an activity instead of a necessity.
Yeah, just expanding on what she was saying there. I don't know what the average age is in here, but I grew up in the 60s and 70s. And when you needed clothes for the new school year or whatever, you would have a shopping outing, and we would go downtown and buy our clothes, pick out a dress or two or something, and then go across the street to the library or whatever, and that was it, and you were set for the season. And then I have a very clear memory of when malls started coming along. I remember the first mall in Minneapolis, because my relatives lived there, and we went up there, and it was just like a wonderland. And so malls became a destination, malls became entertainment, everything was there, your food, your carousels, all of that. So it just became a thing you did, is you would go out and buy stuff. So in my lifetime, I've seen that change over 3 or 4 decades. So I think that's a big part of what's going on here. People, in a way, it sounds sad, but people kind of don't know what else to do with themselves sometimes. Yeah.
Okay, so meaninglessness. We have no meaning in our lives anymore. And that's basically why we are, it's basically why we are shopping more, is because we've lost track, I think, of other things we can do except shopping as a hobby. I think there's also a big difference between apparel and fashion, and it seems like that is never talked about enough. We don't all deserve fashion. We deserve clothing to keep us warm. And I think what we do with our clothing, we can make clothing into fashion, but we're letting brands dictate to us what fashion is. So it's this idea of democratizing fashion, but it's not really this democratizing. When we heard the first panel, talking about what that democratizing of fashion does for us, but then for others in another country, they get paid less to support our meaninglessness. So it kind of comes down to that. But
Put it that way. Wow. Okay. I guess I'm into sort of slow change. We talked about slow fashion. I think that a lot of what we're talking about is more or less tweaking the system. And I guess I'd like to sort of get us maybe thinking more about how could we change the system itself. And I have a couple of suggestions of readings. There's a lot actually happening right now. It's an interesting time to be involved in education. And so I'd like to put two names forward. One is, I want to make sure I get it right, is Juliet Shore, who has been writing about this. She's a sociologist up at Boston University. And she wrote back in, one of her famous books is The Overspent American, Why We Want What We Don't Need. That was back in 1999. And the one I really like is Born to Buy, The Commercialized Child and the New Consumer Culture. And her latest one is On Plenitude, The New Economics of True Wealth. And so I think she's trying to frame some of the questions that we have here from a sociological perspective. Again, her last name is S-C-H-O-R, and her first name is Juliet. And she's been really thinking about this for quite some time, of how do we end up here. And so, while I think that we all do have our shopaholic pieces that we struggle with, she's really looking for a more structural, sociological explanation of why we end up with the society we end up with. And certainly, at least some big part of it is that we are a consumption-based economy. We are a consumer-based economy in the United States with a domestic market that really does drive our economy. So it's not entirely accidental that we're bombarded, with this idea of shopping as a piece of what we do. And as women, and this is the thing that I've sort of been sitting on the edge of my seat thinking about too, is that we make a lot of decisions around purchases of clothing, not necessarily just our own fashion clothing, but often for families or for, again, we are obviously very strong in terms of the purchasing power around this particular consumption item. So that's one thing, is that I think that we need to give ourselves a little bit of a break and not see it simply as an individual, although that doesn't let us off the hook for really thinking very seriously about our purchases. I think, in fact, that that's one of the drivers of change really is sitting in this room. The other one, though, I'd like to sort of put out there is a book that is really making a lot of waves in Europe. It has not seemed to hit here as well. And this one is by Kate Raworth, Raworth. It's a very tiny little book, and it's called The Donut Economics. So what we're really talking about when we're talking about long-linked supply chains, and we're talking about local labor conditions, we're talking about political economy, and how those decisions are made at all levels, at the multilateral all the way down often to local community decision makers. Her book is really interesting because she's saying it's how we teach economics in the business schools that get us to this problem, which is why I announced that I teach in a business program. She's saying only when we really change the models of economics that we're teaching to business folks will we get change in the kinds of brands and businesses. We can't compliance them out of their bad behaviors. It has to become a more organic piece of how we think about both economics and how we think about business education. And I want to give a shout out to Trinity here, because Trinity has, with a number of other small liberal arts colleges, has been in the sustainable business model, and I've been teaching that now for about 10 years, and that was a little bit ahead of the curve. Just the short version of the donut economics, she's saying that this economic model, whatever we're going to develop, and she's saying it's much more permeable than we tend to think, is based on a social foundation where social needs are met and a sustainable ceiling. I like the idea. And the donut, so the outer rim of the donut is a sustainable ceiling. The inner is the social foundation, and in between there is where the economy should be developed. And her point is, there's nothing sacred about profit or profit maximization.
this idea that every time workers' wages goes up, it has to be passed on the consumer is a choice that is made by the business, by the strategists themselves. That is a business choice as to where you put that additional cost. That could also come out of CEO salaries, right? I mean, there's nothing there's nothing that says that every time we get hit up with a tariff and those costs have to be streamlined straight through to the consumer. These are business choices, and it's not as it's not as complicated to sort of rethink some of this, but it is really an issue that we do not teach future business people and managers to think in more complex terms that move away from only profit maximization. So that's the short.
To piggyback off what was just said, can you guys tell me what do you think the role of the economy has played in the rise of overconsumption as it pertains to this idea around fast fashion and people preferring fast fashion?
I mean, I think, I don't want to keep harping on meaninglessness, so I'm going to go on. But really, it's at the bottom of everything. I think over the years, when a lot of us know the history, when NAFTA was signed and everybody went overseas and everything was cheaper, and so we had access to cheaper clothes. Our relationship changed with our clothing. But it's us who's fueling the fast fashion brands. It's not. I mean, the fast fashion brands are just putting it out there for us to take a lunch break, to go on our first date, to get that first job and just get that thing. I have a closet that I just love. I love everything in my closet. But it was funny on Thursday. I was like, what the heck am I wearing today? For today, and I started thinking maybe I'll just go somewhere. And I was like, oh my, this is like everything I'm not I'm talking about. And but it's kind of you have these. We're all human. I mean, I did this thing about 3 years ago. I did the Taylor Project. It was called, and I gave up buying clothing, jewelry, and shoes for 1 year. Nothing. To see why I wanted things, to see my own personal behavior, and it's a very weird behavior. Like even if you do it for a month or something, I started thinking, I can get those shoes. Nobody's gonna know I don't have those shoes. It's just me, And I started as this kind of addictive, weird behavior. I started thinking, and I would write it down. I would blog about it too, just like what. And here I am writing about sustainable fashion for a decade and saying, this overconsumption. But we just have to keep paying attention to what we're doing, why we want something. It's this kind of, go check out things that you like, take a step back, and give yourself 24 hours before you buy something, and then see if you still want it. And then, that starts shifting your behavior. Start talking about it to your friends. Start making ripple effects out. And then that starts kind of changing behavior. And it's in a different way, but I mean, I feel like of all the things that I've done in the past, 10, 13 years, wearing many hats in sustainable fashion, the most important or impactful change that I've been able to make is just talking to my family, talking to my teenage daughter, getting her to talk to her friends, and it's like that commercial back in the old days, and so on, and so on. But it's it's these ripple effects, and I have no idea if I just answered your question, but.
Okay, there's something I like to talk about, and I've blogged about this some, and I have this conversation with people often if they'll let me. But I like to ask the question, what do we think of when we think, what is a good price? And I think we're almost all of us as Americans and beyond, conditioned to think a good price for something is where I'm getting the most I can for the least amount of money. What if we could switch that around and start talking about it in a different way? What if a good price for something is something where all along the line, from the source through the supply chain and the production, people were paid fairly, the materials were they paid what the materials were worth, And so when we end up with something and we look at it and we say, this is a good price, all along the line, this was valued in a true way. And it's really kind of an upside down thing. And when you're talking about sustainable fashion, sustainable apparel, whatever, and we know because we're working in it, people do look askance at, what things cost. And even though they know and they're interested in it for very good reasons, they're still caught short by what it really costs to bring an apparel item to you that really reflects what it costs all along the way. We've all seen the true cost, and such a great phrase. So anyway, I would like to just start that idea of just like turning the consumer mindset upside down. What is a good price for an item? And if you start thinking about it in a different way, and you go out and you purchase things that are that new idea of a good price, how would that change things?
Okay, I was gonna write down some things that I just thought, but but now that I have the mic, yeah, the true cost accounting. I think that prices that incorporate the externalities that go into making our apparel and our clothes and our textiles is definitely one good way of really showing what it takes to make the things that we like to buy. I think also talking about the economy, we live in a very linear economy right now, and there's a move, I think coined by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, circular economy, and I think that we need to start thinking more in terms of circularity, where brands are not incentivized to just push more out into the retail space, into the consumer space, but they're really looking at their products as something that they can use as a tool of interaction and relationships with their customers. And I think that that's going to entail changing business models where you're seeing, instead of just a direct manufacturer, producer to consumer, one-way direction relationship, you're seeing product as service models, you're seeing sharing economy, things like that. So I think when you're talking about the economy, how does the economy play into fast fashion, or how does the economy and fast fashion lead to this overconsumption that we're seeing? I think those are a couple of the things that matter.
Touching back on CEO pay, I think you look at CEOs, they're continuously over the past couple decades, their incomes are rising, and the rest of us, our wages have stayed really flat. And so our wages are staying flat, our costs are continually going up, that means we have less money all the time. So when we go out to shop, I think having the ability to buy something that is cheap and looks cute, I think it's a ball, going back to the kind of idea of mindlessness, or meaninglessness. And I see that, I think it's a very temporary, quick fix for when you're feeling, stressed or bad. You can buy something nice, you can maybe wear it once, and it makes you feel a little bit better. And I've seen this directly because I've, been doing a clothing pickup and recycling service, and I get so many things that still have tags on them all the time. People are getting rid of things, they bought it without thinking, it made them feel better. It sat in their closet forever, they never wore it. So I think that, there is, on the economic side, there's also a very close link with our own individual economics.
Before the next question, this is a big deal to me. If you have something in your closet that has tags on it, raise your hand. Don't raise your hand. I'm gonna be mad. Don't raise your hand. Lie to me. Now y'all know how I feel about that. And also the one thing that we really haven't touched on is if you really also want to understand why we buy, watch every season of Mad Men. I It's a big reason why we buy. It's a multi-billion-dollar, right, multi-billion-dollar industry, and those brands have to pay somebody to make us want the things that we don't need. So moving on. Can you guys talk a little bit about this, how overconsumption has caused this textile waste drama?
Can I change this slightly? Okay. Just want to put out another shout out about how to create some basis for change. And this again is not unknown, but this is through social impact investing. Turns out that where the money goes also does have an impact on how our, big brands operate. It's a little tricky because it's really just emerging. So Goldman Sachs just came out with one, this is not a plug for them, by the way, called Just. And it turns out that when you dig a little deeper, it's not in fact what it says it is. So it's like a lot of these other things, just because it looks good on the surface doesn't mean it is. But on the other hand, a number of the conferences I go to really are focusing in the sort of business education, are really focusing on the investment side. They're saying if we can get the investment piece altered, a lot of these other pieces will, we can only do so much with compliance, I guess, is that kind of my starting point. And so we have to think of other means besides sort of once these chains are up and running, trying to change them, to perhaps back to a little bit the circular economy that has more to do with the materiality of what's in the supply chain, but maybe in the way the supply chain is designed itself, and that does have money impact. So I just wanted to put a plug in for sort of educating yourself around social impact investing, because everyone will end up with a pension one day or some sort of some sort of investment. And it is important to sort of know more about how those are, because they're taking shape now. This is not something that is kind of a done deal. And this again is where our voices do matter.
So two things. One, we had an event last week in Brooklyn. It was a closed event. It was only for investors and large brands. And it was on financing and sustainability with a huge focus on the human rights piece, which was a fascinating conversation. One of the things when you talk about compliance, it was, and maybe I'm not from the investing world. I invest in clothing. I invest in a different way. But the term that I can't stop thinking about was how they were talking about investing in compliance and getting investors to. For me, it was kind of like a flipping of the tables. Like, what if the manufacturers could actually flip it on the brands and say, if we can't invest in you, kind of as part of this trend towards sustainability, then maybe we don't want to work with you. Maybe we will work with somebody else. So it's this real power to the brands that I thought was really fascinating. And so now I'm watching that a lot too. But in terms of circularity, that's come up a couple times. And I've had some really good conversations about circularity. It's great to think about we can keep consuming at the levels that we are, at the pace we are, because we can keep recycling and recycling. Well, that doesn't help us either. It's a Band-Aid on a bigger problem that we have here, which is we're consuming too much. We consume too much food, we consume too much clothing, we consume too much pharmaceutical, drugs, we consume too much. So if we always have this Band-Aid that's about recycling and having circularity, then I think it's just prolonging this bigger problem that we have. That said, there are brands that are stepping up to be part of that and to find ways to make new fibers out of cheap crap, synthetic fibers. But I think there's this other piece that we really have to be starting to think about is let's invest in with not synthetic fibers so that we're helping the oil industry.
Well, in terms of the textile waste and all of that, where we're talking about consumers giving themselves permission to perpetuate these bad habits. I can, if I don't need this anymore, I'll just give it to Goodwill or whoever. And then, of course, as most people here probably know, those things end up disrupting local economies overseas or ending up in the landfills anyway. So one part of my answer to your question is like really focusing on education, telling people, saying, we understand your good intentions and giving this dress to Goodwill or whatever, but the reality is this. Just really let people know what's going on in a big way. And the other thing is we should never underestimate what happens in the marketplace when consumers want something on a large scale. Look what happened when they came along and said you shouldn't eat fat anymore in the 60s, and all of a sudden everything became low fat. And we're still dealing with that, 5 decades later, and gluten-free and all of this. And when people really start talking about something on the ground level, the market changes and producers adjust, and they adjust quickly. And when people start saying, I don't want to buy that. I don't want to buy that cheap dress. That dress, first of all, it's not a good price because it doesn't reflect the value of it. And second of all, it's not going to last very long and it's going to end up in the trash pile. I don't want it. When people start talking about that on a certain scale, things change.
Quickly, I think that there are so many parallels between food and fashion, and particularly as a brand, Lady Farmer, we love to talk about this because we talk about the fiber in your clothes as an agricultural product, so clothing is agriculture also. To the waste point, I'm thinking about in our home, we've really moved, especially since starting this brand, towards zero waste in our food space and our purchasing habits. And it's interesting, I do help take out the trash sometimes. And but recently, honestly, like the past few weeks, it's been like sometimes we don't even need to take the trash to the end of the driveway because it's just like not enough. I'm not saying like, woo, we're so awesome at this, but it's really because we, all of our, like, I get lazy, don't even walk the compost pile, so I'll dump like veggie stuff kind of like in the garden or like just, and we don't do plastic and we, like all of these things that because we are conscious about it on the front end and we have little systems in place to sort of like reuse, and this has been like a slow process, we didn't get here overnight, but what if, I'm kind of rambling, what if it was like that with our clothes? Like what if we thought about what am I going to do with this when it's done and besides just giving it away or sort of putting it onto someone else? Or am I even, if I can't take responsibility for the end of this item's life, then I shouldn't take responsibility, I shouldn't bring it into my realm. So that's something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. I'm on a roll, so I'll also make a plug. I do think that this is a very, the whole paradigm, is a very masculine and patriarchal paradigm. And the circular, the communal, the let's think about things, not as an intrusion into, disrupting your own system, but as a collective, connected system is much more feminine. And so I think going back to the circular economy and just the whole rise of the feminine energy. Whoa, didn't know I was going there with that. But when we're more aware and we have more balance and more connection to nature, maybe the paradigm will start to shift.
So I wanted to first comment on something Amy said of the circular economy, and just because it's a closed loop doesn't sort of give us free license to consume at the same rates we're consuming now. And there was a parallel when she said that. I work in the recycling and sustainable waste management industry, and when a product is packaged in something that's recyclable, people feel less guilty about buying it. So they actually end up buying more as long as they feel like they're doing good by recycling than if it were packaged in something that could only go to landfill. So it is definitely true. I will also, I'm gonna kind of talk about textile waste, and I'm gonna throw a lot of stats out at you, but really I'm just trying to get at sort of the bigger picture. I've done a lot of research on textile waste, mainly in the United States, because, you know, my expertise around waste management is mostly of a domestic focus. But there are some pretty staggering trends when you're looking. The EPA publishes the Sustainable Materials Management Facts and Figures report every year that quantifies the amount of municipal solid waste that's generated in the U.S. Textile waste between 2000 and 2014, the 2015 numbers just came out, so I have to update this, but between 2000 and 2014,
Consumers could just see the volume of waste that's being produced. It would kind of hit home that they are producing a small proportion of that. And going back to the, you know, hierarchy, it should be reduce first, reuse second, recycle last. Recycle is your last resort. And I found, you know, when I was looking for a sorter grader, because I was offering a home pickup service of used clothing, and then I would work with partners to either donate or resell or recycle everything. When I was looking for a sorter grader, I called all the companies in the DC area, and only one company was willing to work with me because I had less than 40,000 pounds of volume at a time. So that's what we're talking about here. Your average trash bag full of clothing is about 30 pounds. So that's kind of like the scale of how much clothing that they're dealing with. And I was producing hundreds and in the low thousands of pounds, but that was still not worth their time. So if you think about it, you know, you're making a face. It's true! Yeah, if you think about it from just, you think I'm just dropping off a couple of bags of clothing, but when they all add up, it's a really massive problem. And somebody mentioned, I think Mary, that there is a lot of that clothing is getting exported. So Marissa said, only 20% of the clothing that you donate to Goodwill is being resold in the Goodwill and going to the local community. So I think there's a little bit of self-delusion from the consumer point of view that we're going and we're doing a good thing by donating clothing that somebody's going to put into good use, you know, some person in need. But in reality, 80% of what gets donated is being exported overseas to developing countries. And essentially, with the huge amount of clothing that we're producing, you know, it's like a hockey stick shaped graph of the amount of clothing that is being manufactured and disposed of. Those countries they only have so much capacity to manage, and so much need for secondhand, you know, American clothing. So that's kind of my piece.
Too. Started to say Helma.
Thank you. Can you guys explain to the audience what this lovely term greenwashing is? And what are some of the things they can look for to avoid folks who are pretending to be something they're not?
I'll just start off with the conversation with the marketing is a big, it's sort of, that is the relationship with the consumer. And so this is where you're actually having a dialogue between the two sides. You're wanting something and they're trying to promote it. I think there are two types of greenwashing. I think that the one that we sort of companies are really trying to say they are something when they don't have to back it up. And I think the other one, what we've already heard this morning, is where companies think they're doing the right things, but again, it's so complex that you can't always find out without quite a bit of data if in fact you've really managed it. So again, I don't know if that helps to shape the conversation or not, but I do think that we're moving into a more complex set of purchasing. That's why I gave the example of even looking at money and trying to sort of, an investment. You would think that would be a fairly straightforward thing to be able to track. This really does involve monitoring, it does involve data, it does involve analysis. And one of the things that I will suggest too is that companies tend to get, with all of the standards we're putting out, which is fantastic, and again, this is not a negative in any sense, but companies have to pick and choose which standards they're going to try and comply with. because standards are not always standardized. And this also can create some confusion in the purchasing area for people who are attempting to sort it out, but it also can create confusion on the side of the companies in order to try to figure out which is the best standard to try to comply with for their particular demographic, etc. So I guess what I'm trying to suggest is that greenwashing is a broad label that we've sort of used to represent a lot that goes on in marketing and purchasing and sort of how that decision making is made.
Okay. So I think when we talk about greenwashing, there's so many rabbit holes. And it's like sustainability, right? So if water efficiency is what you care about in sustainability, or women's rights, or circular design, or just circularity, I think then you focus on that area, and then you can start talking about greenwashing in that area. People are really, really creative and great at tricking us, and I hate to be the sort of I'm like the everyman speaker is kind of how everybody relates to me. I'm not going to give you facts, I'm not going to give you stats, I'm not going to, my family hates me because I'm always talking about manufacturing facilities. Even my son and daughter are like, and these manufacturing facilities, But, most people don't talk about manufacturing facilities or compliance, or go ask your mom or dad to talk to you about anything that we're talking about probably, and they'll have no idea what the hell you're talking about, nor will they want to engage with you on it. So, sometimes I think about with like Patagonia, years ago with their "Don't buy this jacket." New York Times, like this huge ad, jacket, don't buy it. And they sold more of those jackets than they ever had. So it's this kind of, let's cut to the chase. Let's talk to people in a way that they'll actually understand, so we're not talking in business jargon to them all the time. So, because then we become the sort of greenwashers as we're talking about it, because we think we know what we're talking about, we actually don't know what we're talking about, and let's talk to people in a way that they understand. So I guess that's how I feel about greenwashing. There's just, and one of the questions that I had written down that was one of those really long questions that I don't blame them, for not reading, was, when we talk about even this whole made in the U.S., the tagging system, there's manufacturers coming in from other countries to make clothing in our country to put the Made in the USA label on it. I wrote an article on 10 myths about made in labels. In Italy, there's lots of Chinese manufacturers that have set up, and they make it in Italy. So it's made in Italy, but it doesn't say anything about heritage or craftsmanship or anything like that. It's made there. And I don't know what the percentage is for made in the USA, but I think you can, it could be materials that were brought in and they were assembled in the USA, it'll say, or you can sew a label in and it says made in the USA. So, again, when we're consuming, this idea of consuming clothing, when we're purchasing clothing, when we're making decisions, it's just best to think about, what are the areas that matter most to you. And again, I'll go back to the first thing I said. What is it in sustainability that it means to you, that you want to focus on, and pick that rabbit hole that you want to go down, and then apply greenwashing to that. And then because it's hard. If you're going to take everything on, forget it. You're going to hate yourself because you're not going to do a good job.
Okay. I think we write about consumer things a lot, and consumer mindset and all of this, and it all boils down, I think, to one thing, and that is just paying attention. And we see this in the food revolution, the slow food movement from the last decade or so. And there's so much greenwashing in the advertising vernacular, of course, natural and healthy, and all those things that we've learned, the consumers have learned over the years. Just because that cardboard box says natural, that doesn't mean it's going to be good for me. So the food consumer, I think, has become a lot more savvy over the years and knowing what they actually want to put in their mouth. So I think hopefully we're moving in that direction in the clothing, the slow fashion movement. And people and consumers, the main thing I think is just pay attention. Pay attention to the vocabulary that's being used in the marketing, and pay attention to what you're reacting to. A great example, I think, is cotton. Cotton has such a great marketing thing going on. It's natural. It's natural. And you see the commercials, cotton is the fabric of our lives. What a great line. And when you we go out there and talk to people about what is slow fashion, what's sustainability, and so many people will say, oh, I like to wear natural fibers. Everything I buy is cotton. And, depending on what the setting is, I may or may not go, well, let me tell you about cotton. As most of us know here, cotton, cotton is really complicated in terms of, sustainability. So one of our brand standards is, to as much as possible, we go for organic cotton, because there's a huge difference between organic cotton and conventionally grown cotton. But anyway, and then natural, eco-friendly, earth-friendly, all these things that are being tossed around now in terms in apparel marketing. And so what does that person mean? And just recently, we were shopping around for some produce bags to put in our store. And all over it was eco-friendly, natural, blah, blah, blah. And but it wasn't descriptive enough. Got on the phone, talked to the guy, what is this? And of course it wasn't organic cotton, it was conventional cotton. And he started telling me how, the organic cotton was prohibitively expensive, and so they had to make that difficult choice. And I said, I understand, I really, really understand. But for the consumer to pay attention and to really dig deep like that. Now, how many people are actually going to do it? I don't know. But the point from an education standpoint is to just really tell people, this is what you're dealing with. You have to go through the words. You have to know what these words mean or not mean, and just be super, super discerning and discriminating for you. And that's where it all starts. And that's where we start demanding things from producers. And I think that's where change really starts.
I'll quickly go back to a few things that Amy said earlier, and that has been mentioned before, and also this circular, how everything's connected. I love this background. Something that really bothers me about greenwashing that Amy mentioned before is let's turn plastic bottles into clothes. That's not helpful, really. I mean, it's a Band-Aid, but that is tricky. It sounds good, and it is good in a way. But we're not thinking about where the plastic bottles came from and where they'll go when we're done with. Even when we wash the body-hugging yoga pants that are made out of plastic bottles. So that's irritating. It's this idea, not that a brand is intentionally keeping information from you or telling you wrong information, but it's saying something that's true. Yes, this is made out of recycled plastic bottles, but it's the consumer's responsibility to understand what that means. That plastic bottles are made out of plastic, which is made out of oil, which then the plastic will, the microfibers and all that. That's an issue. I forgot my other point. That's it.
I would like to just quickly echo a couple of points that were made. I have less to comment on greenwashing itself. I think for me it's more about just a lack of transparency in the clothing that we wear and where it's produced and where where the materials are sourced from. And kind of the PET bottle example, when you were talking about that, it reminded me of, compostable products, and they're great. Compostable products are great, as long as they can actually decompose it in a compost facility. But you have to have access to a compost facility, right? If you're buying it and then you're just tossing it in the garbage, it's just going to produce methane in a capped landfill. So I think there is a lot about the lack of transparency, and in order to change. A better way of consuming, I would say, buy reuse, buy recycled content, repair, and just buy from, support your local sustainable producers.
Yeah, I'll definitely echo that point. And also, just going back, echoing what everybody has said, I think accountability, so holding accountable the companies that you care about or that you're interested in. And one way you can do that is call them up, send them an email, harass them, ask them questions. How are you producing things? Who's making my clothing? And the other thing you can do, I'm on the board of a nonprofit called As You Sow, which is about shareholder activism. And so if you are a shareholder, you have the right to vote on different items at your shareholder meeting. Even if you have one share of a company's stock, you have the right to vote. So you can be present at those meetings and ask questions and demand answers, and you can put forth proposals that the company has to answer to. So there are many ways that you can actually hold companies accountable, and until we have a really thorough vetting process that customers can rely on when they're making their shopping decisions, it is, especially the people in this room who are already engaged, it's really our responsibility to be demanding the answers and transparency from companies that, either it's not their focus or they don't want to tell you those things.
Going on the comment about the recycled plastic bottles and clothing, recycled clothing, and as a brand, we try not to go there because not only the problems that Emma suggested in those recycled products and what happens to them after they're disposed of, but the real danger to us is that the consumer gets hold of that and says, oh, this is okay because it's recycled. They see that word. I think this is a form of greenwashing, and they latch onto it, and they think they're doing their consumer duty and sustainability when really it's super misleading. So there's really two levels of that we gives it permission, and we number one, try not to participate, and number two, try to educate on it.
Thank you. We're going to take a few questions. The first one is, how can we as consumers and lovers of fashion support small makers without contributing to the problem of overconsumption? I don't know who asked this question, but it's a great question.
So, I have lots of thoughts about this because it does seem ironic that we are a small producer making more things and then saying don't buy new things. I think that before we can dismantle the patriarchy, we need to, we're in this system, and so instead of attacking it from totally foreign, from a totally different viewpoint, we gotta meet the people where they are, and we gotta meet ourselves where we are. And right now, we're not just gonna stop buying things. We're not just going to stop in appreciating art and fashion and someone else's designs. So I think that where you can, and where you need to, where you can justify the need for yourself, shopping from small, local, sustainably in alternative to what you know is greenwashing and opaque. That's the better choice, and in doing that, it sort of ripples down to you have something to talk about. Your clothes have a story, you have done it more mindful, or you've bought it more mindfully, and you are more invested. And so I think it kind of comes hand in hand. We can still exist as and have similar behaviors, but sort of alter them a bit until we change the paradigm.
I'll say something along those similar lines. Is that you have to think about it as displacing purchases from unsustainable producers, and maybe you still only buy what you need, right? You don't buy more than you need, and then if you think about it, if you're buying one thing that's sustainable from a company that you respect and that it's doing the right thing, then you're not only offsetting maybe one purchase from an unsustainable company, maybe if it's a longer lasting item, you're offsetting the purchase of multiple items.
I'm just going to make one quick point. Elizabeth Klein talks about this in her book. The idea that nowadays we've started bragging about how little we paid for something. And I think if we can swap that out by talking about the local manufacturer, the local designer that we purchase something from, and use that as an exciting talking point, I think that would be a really great swap to make.
Just looking at it as, we're never going to stop buying things. That's just not going to happen. So we encourage the consumer to seek out alternatives. And you have to be informed and educated and know what you're looking for. But there are alternatives out there. And go for them.
Just support small business, incubators, startups, accelerators, and be aware that this is maybe it's not just about changing the existing model, but maybe about starting alternatives to it.
Yeah, you should shop our fashion.
We're very close to being out of time, and I know you guys are probably really hungry, but there have been a couple of questions sort of, I think as Karen did to combine them. People are sort of asking what can we do as consumers to sort of force brands to do the right thing. Again, I think we said this a couple of times today, Fashion Revolution is an excellent resource for that. We really should be saying, who made my clothes, and when you're upset about something, we have to go back to these brands and say this is not okay. And I had this conversation, I thought it was so funny, you guys made my day, because I was talking to Benita at the Free the Slaves event. I was drawing the parallel about how the food industry quickly got their act together, and why can't the fashion industry, like the parallel, you guys, I'm gonna kiss you, the parallels between how the fashion industry quickly got themselves together. We can do the same thing. So on that note, I would like to thank you guys very much.